All right, finally, we're here on another episode of the Scripting Then podcast. And today I have a very special guest, Graham Ritchie. So please go ahead, introduce yourself, and let's see what we talk about.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Graham. I'm an accessibility consultant and DevRel, and 15 years of doing accessibility. I've seen a few things that made me cry, so we're going to talk about those today.
Yeah.
But recently, just become a W3C invited expert, so I'm not just the one putting all the rules into place and trying to make websites accessible. I'm the one hopefully writing the next generation of guidance for
Oh,
people to
wow.
follow. So that's an exciting development in the last few weeks.
Nice. I didn't know about
Um,
that. Congrats.
yeah, thank you. And so that's basically me. I ran my own business for, like I said, nearly 15 years as a accessibility consultant. Had a little breakout, worked at Daily Dev for a year, and now going back into tech as a DevRel. Hopefully with a little bit of accessibility on the side.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely we're gonna be talking about accessibility today. Uh, it's it's a it's an interesting topic because you're one of the few people I've seen that actually constantly cover it, constantly are constantly talking about it. You and a couple more, but why do you think it's such? Why do you think there is so many, or not, rather, so little people, so less people, so few people? Yeah. Why do you think there are so few people talking? English. English is complicated. Why do you think there are so few people talking about it? Even now, 2024.
Well, first of all, your English is awesome, so I won't worry too much about that
Thank
one.
you.
It's like a never-ending cycle. The problem is that you're not taught about accessibility while you're learning to code in boot camps or courses. So then you get into software engineering, you're 3 or 4 years in, all of a sudden you start hearing this accessibility thing, by which point you've probably created 100 tutorials if you're a content creator. You've taught people all the wrong ways, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And it needs that sort of someone to step in early in the process to actually say, hey, if you focus on accessibility, your life becomes easier as a developer, and it's more inclusive, and you avoid lawsuits and many other things. So it's why I'm a big advocate for it. There's many benefits and I think the drawbacks that people see are quite people don't quite understand them. They think it's a lot more complicated than it is, and a lot more difficult than it is. And hopefully, yet again, we'll have a chance to chat about what is hard and what isn't hard about accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the things I wanted to cover because you said it's not as hard as it's supposed to, as it looks, and um, it's. I think that the main misconception about this, even leaving the being hard or not part, is that is it worth it? Spending time and effort and for companies money on accessibility when I mean from what I've seen and what I've heard, the target audience is so small. I mean, is that a fact or is that a misconception?
Misconception. Small target audience. 1 in 6 people have some form of disability, and obviously that's weighted towards an older audience as well. So especially if you have a product that's like holidays or something like that, guaranteed that you're probably going to have 1 in 3 people, maybe 1 in 2 people on your site that have a disability of some form. The misconception behind it is because people don't think of all the different types of disability, colourblindness being a very common one among men. 1 in 12 men are colourblind. Obviously, is it something like 1 in 3 people need glasses, something like that? Hey, you're
Hey.
wearing glasses. So there are there's many levels to it, and I think the problem is that you get painted this picture of a person who uses a wheelchair. That's what people see as disability. They don't think about all the other things, and people very rarely think about things like mental health and mental health issues. So it's a very broad gamut. And the other thing is, we get temporary disabilities. You can break your arm, break a leg,
True. True.
whatever it may be. Obviously, breaking a leg doesn't tend to affect your use of a computer unless you like to type with your feet and you're a bit
Yeah,
weird. Not
some
judging,
people.
but
Yeah,
yeah, some people. Um, but then there's also situational disability, bright sunshine on your phone, or you've got a newborn child and you're having to try and work with one hand and things like that. So it covers so much, and I think like I said, the misconception is down to education more than anything, because I wasn't always into accessibility and advocating for people with disabilities. I was the same as everybody else. I was a developer who knew nothing about it, hadn't been taught it. When you start looking and realizing how big an audience it is larger than like vegan market. There's more disabled people in America than black people. Like that's the and obviously some disabled people are black, but
Yeah,
to
yeah,
give you an idea of how
yeah.
large a minority it is, that should give you some idea of the scope. And it's the beauty for business, and we'll talk about this obviously, is nobody cares about people with
Right.
disabilities. So it's very easy to become a leader in a particular niche or a particular industry, and be one of the inclusive companies. And nowadays, that's even more powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned tons of cases, and I think that most people associates the accessibility practice to just adding alt text to an image and then just I'm done. I've done my part. So you mentioned the type of disabilities, but what are the ways in which you can tackle those from the technical point of view? What can you do to help with blind, for example, or having a baby and having to type with one hand, for example, like that silly example. What can you do to help there?
That would literally lead me to tell you everything about accessibility. So I'll
Well,
pick a couple of
yeah,
examples.
yeah,
And,
yeah. Let's not go super deep, but just the highlights.
yeah, just the overview.
Yeah, yeah,
First things first, you said, oh, yeah, adding alt text to your alt attributes on images. Look, if people did that, I'd be happy. But the amount of people who don't do that, they post on social media, they'll do a screenshot of code. No way for anyone who's using assistive technology in order to be able to read that image, so they can't enjoy it. So, even that, we can't get that one right.
right.
But you mentioned the color blindness. That is, don't convey things with just color. There's a lot of times you'll see like statuses on an application. It'll be like a red dot for bad and a green dot for good, and that's the only indicator.
Yeah,
Well, yet again, red-green colorblind is the most common. So that just is grey or grey. Not much use, not
that
very
that
easy to
that
tell what's
example,
going on.
and sorry to interrupt you, but that example is so powerful because you would assume that if you go with those colors, they're so intuitive that you don't need anything else. I mean, you're doing UX, you're acing your UX, and that's actually not the case.
No, exactly. And it's so easy to fix, because then you could just change it, instead of a circle, to like an exclamation mark for danger and a tick for good. You can still use your red green at that point, but you've got another way of conveying the information.
Right.
And then the one-handed thing, to be fair, that tends to be handled more by the system. But it's like multi-key controls tend to be the thing to try and minimize in your application. So if you're trying to be conscious of that fact, it's fine. But like Windows has sticky keys built in. I'm pretty sure Mac has something very similar. So there are ways. And if you don't know sticky keys, if you like tap Control 5 times on your keyboard, or Shift, I think it is, to activate it.
Yeah.
Every time you press Control, it's then down, and then when you press Control, it's up. It functions like the caps lock key at that point. So it allows you to use one hand or one finger even for multi-key combinations. But yeah, so those are a few examples. Another massive one that people get wrong all the time, that's really straightforward, is heading levels on pages. So people who it isn't always, but it tends to be people who are blind or have poor vision, use something called a screen reader, and that turns the code on your page into speech. Or if blind deaf, they may even turn it into braille. But basically, it reads the code on your page,
Right.
and it outputs it in a format that's accessible for that person. a lot of people don't get the heading structure right on a page. Like they'll use a heading level 2 because it looks the right size rather than it being in a hierarchical order on the
Right.
page.
Yeah.
The problem with that is if I'm using a screen reader, one of the primary ways that I get a familiarity with a page layout is I'll go through the heading levels. So if you've got weird, wonderful heading levels and you skip heading levels, I can miss huge chunks of content on your page. So there should always be 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. It should never skip from 2 to 4 or 2 to 5
Right.
or something. So those are a few of the basics. Those are these ones. Oh, labels on forms, please. It's not difficult. like a label on a form is a massive accessibility win. Not a placeholder text, an actual physical label. And make sure you actually associate that label with the form. So you either wrap your form in a label, or even better yet, you go old school and you have a label with 4 equals the ID
Right.
of the element, and you give that input an ID. The old school way is mainly because Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is voice activation for a computer, doesn't understand implicit labels where you actually wrap it. So there you go. There's it. But you're talking 0.5% there. So
Right.
as long as you use labels, I'll be happy.
And that's funny because I think that, I mean, from the old ways, you would do it that way. You should before the fancy new visualizations that you have right now, you didn't have any other way to write a form element with some text associated to it. So you had the label and it simplified your life. Now you have so many different fancy libraries that just don't get it right. That make it look nice for you, but that's it.
Yeah, that can be the other problem when you start leaning heavily on the libraries. All of a sudden, everything becomes a div, and the problem is that I'd say 80% of accessibility is using semantically correct elements. So if you use a section element for a new section, if you use main for all the content on your page, if you use an aside for a sidebar, if you use those sorts of elements correctly, you do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Right.
But like frameworks, especially React, React, but
Wow.
the
Really?
divitis came from React. I don't know where it came, why, but I think it's because it just got bad, really bad. Sorry, anyone who likes React.
Well, man, I liked React until now. But
It's not the framework; it's the people using it in the code examples. To be clear,
yes,
nothing
absolutely.
wrong with React fundamentally.
True. Let's save that. But it's true. I mean, like you said, I mean, the language, essentially HTML, is giving you everything you need to be accessible right off the bat. You just need to know
A
about it.
lot of it, yeah. There's some things that aren't perfect, like multi-selects. Native HTML multi-select is actually not a good experience.
Yeah.
So you are better building your own component there. But for majority of things, yeah. I mean, accordions, summary details elements, if you don't know them, go learn them. Best thing ever. It's an accordion built in, no JS, nothing. It's stuff like that, like learn HTML.
Properly.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's loads of people. Yeah,
Go through the basics and don't just jump into React and or any other library. Yeah, absolutely.
I would probably say, yeah, the advice I'd always say is jump into React to get good and get useful so you can get a job. But then first
I like
port
that.
of call.
Okay.
First port of call is learn HTML properly so that when you're building components in React, you're structuring them in the right way.
I like that. People usually go the other way, but yeah, yours is more practical, I guess. Get the job
Yeah,
and then get good at it.
yeah, it's once someone's aware of accessibility, if they I'd love for it to be taught in the boot camps, but
Yeah.
that's a long game for me to start
Yeah.
getting boot camps to teach accessibility. But if it's early in your career, then you're going to start the right way. You're still in learning mode when you get your first job. So
Yeah.
I'd say as long as it's in the first 6 months of you getting your first job, from the first day you start coding. If you're in that window and you start focusing on semantic HTML and learning about accessibility, you'll be a much stronger developer in 5 years, and you'll build things that are 90% accessible. If there is such a thing as a percentage of how
Yeah.
accessible something is, versus your senior devs who build garbage. And I've got spicy takes all over the place there, but I don't want to upset everybody.
Why not? I love to. But anyway, moving on. You said that this isn't just good for you as a developer. It's good for a company, for companies to focus on it as well. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What kind of benefits would they get? Let's try to convince them.
So I could be here a while. Look, the first one that everybody always goes to is legal protection, especially if you're a US company and you've got your Series B, Series C funding in place. You are in the threat zone where you may get someone come after you for a legal dispute over the accessibility of your website. They are expensive and time consuming, and they're gonna take a big chunk out of your bottom line stroke investment money. I hate that angle though, personally.
Well,
um the main reason being is the second if you start with legal, then the legal team gets involved. It becomes, what is the minimum we can do to make
right,
sure that we are okay? And that's where you put accessibility, and that's where I'd say 95% of companies who even care about accessibility put it. They put it as oh, it's a legal issue. What's the minimum we do to comply? Let's have an audit done. And then from that audit, we will fix the important things that are going to get us sued. It means that you're never striving for excellence. You're never striving for the best experience possible for people using assistive technology. So it always becomes meh, good enough sort of
right.
thing. So I like to focus the other side, which is 1 in 6 people have a disability. I said it earlier. What do you think happens if you make your product accessible and then shout about it? All of a sudden, people who have a horrible experience on the internet because nobody takes the time or cares about their needs, all of a sudden, there's a company out there caring for your needs. And, it's basically good customer service. That's the way to look at it. The other thing to consider is the disabled community is a very close-knit community in a lot of ways. And so if you impress one person in a particular group, say you make a site that's wonderful to use with a screen reader,
Right.
blind community talks. There are many publications things. All of a sudden, you can get some wonderful word of mouth out of it and capture a whole audience that probably are trying to muddle through with some of your competitors. And like I said, it's not hard to stand out. And you just imagine if you were, we say there's only 1 in 6 people, or, maybe 10% of people who use the internet. That's the way to look at it, because not all disabilities affect you a way you can
Right.
interact. But if you've got 20 competitors and you're the only one who's looking after people with disabilities, guess where everybody goes? To you. And I'd love 10% of a market, I'll just have all the disabled customers, please. That'd be fantastic. That'll still be the biggest company in any niche.
Yeah.
It's true. So it's as simple as that. And then the third thing is it's really good for morale in a company. Staff tend to stay longer in companies where they care about disability or corporate social responsibility. People are very attuned to it nowadays. So as long as you're doing the right thing for the community, people tend to stick around longer. And that's a big win for companies, let's face it, especially in tech.
Absolutely. I mean,
Spinning someone up on a project takes forever.
yeah, and tons of companies claim to be people first, but they don't really. But they're not. I mean, they don't really show it with action. I guess focusing truly on accessibility because you want to be accessible to others is a true testament of the company being people first. So I guess
Yeah.
that I'm trying to reason what you're saying, but yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, and then there's one last benefit, which is more for the dev team side of things, stroke the design team, which is you have debates sometimes about how we're going to build out a certain component and everything. Well, if you put accessibility first, which very few companies in the world do, but if you put it first in your discussions, normally things have already half been planned out for you or nearly fully planned out for you on any component. You can literally just grab that and run with it and know that it's going to be excellent to use for everybody.
Right.
It solves a lot of UX issues a lot of the time. And if you get to a point where you're stuck, you go, okay, what's this like to use with a keyboard? What's this like to use with a touch device? What if someone has Parkinson's disease? Have we left some white space for them to be able to scroll the page? All sorts of things like that can dictate how you build out and design things, and all of a sudden those conversations become easier rather than 20 prototypes and you don't know which one to run with. So there's the fourth one. And as a developer, I like the sort of restrictions in inverted commas that thinking about things accessibly puts in place. It
Yeah.
makes you think of better ways to do things a lot of the time.
Agree. Agree. And you said that just a few companies truly do this. Do you have examples? Names?
No, this is the problem. No, I do not. So, my previous company, I could have named a few when I ran my own company because that's what I got people to buy into, basically. But no, there are companies that, for example, I really want to work at Upright because they've not got it right by a long way. But the way they approached it was roast us, like tell us all the stuff we're doing wrong. We want to fix this stuff, and that attitude is the more important thing in a company because you will eventually get there. Even the big players like Google and stuff, they put accessibility higher on the list than other companies, but yet again, I still feel like it's done at QA point rather than right at the beginning because there's still a lot of stuff gets through the door. Microsoft aren't bad, ironically, of all the people. Microsoft are actually one of the better companies for getting accessibility right. Not that I ever normally say nice things about Microsoft, but
Well,
in
they've
this instance,
improved
I will.
over the years. I mean, they're not the old
Yeah,
Microsoft. Let's give them that.
exactly. Well, yeah, partially. But no, I can't think of a single decent sized company where I would say, yes, they've got it right. There are some that do better than others, but most of the ones that you and I will use as a dev, they make shocking mistakes. I'm not going to name and shame companies, but
Yeah.
one I've seen many times on websites that amazes me is a button within an anchor, within a hyperlink. Like that happens loads on companies that you may use for your database service provider, shall we say.
Yeah.
uh, it just astounds me. So yeah, it's certainly not high enough up on the list on many companies. And if you want to see an accessible website, go to gov.uk. It's about the only one I can point people through, and the downside of that is
Okay.
it's ugly and boring as hell, so it doesn't help the
Yeah.
case.
So right, people may make the wrong association there. But yeah.
Yeah, because well, we said we'd talk about some sort of myths, and one of the myths is that accessible websites are ugly. They don't have to be.
They don't have to, right?
It's just, yeah, it's just that don't. People who care about accessibility may not be the best designers. So then, when they build something accessible, it doesn't tend to be the prettiest looking thing in the world. Whereas if you get an accessibility consultant in to fix something that's pretty, odds are you'll hardly notice any difference. It'll be a couple of shades darker here for the color contrast. It'll be text a bit bigger over there. Won't be many visual changes a lot of the time. Not
Yeah.
always.
But it'll be accessible to other people, which is the important part. I like that. Give me. I don't want this to be extensively long episode because I know we can spend here 2-3 hours talking about this, but I wanna focus on a few things and get people interested in it. So give me one more myth, the one that really hurts your soul, whenever you see it, whenever you hear it online.
I don't know if you call it a myth, but it's we'll add it to the backlog attitude. It's the doing it at QA attitude to accessibility is, like I said, it's not a myth. It's an industry problem. Because, all credit to any company who puts time into accessibility. But if you're doing it at QA, you're doing it too late. And that's why we have, there you go, I can tie it into a myth. That's why we have the myth that accessibility is expensive. Because if you do it after you've built the damn thing, you end up ripping things out, doing them all over again, spending a lot of time discussing things. Not the way to do it. If you put accessibility early in the conversation and
Right.
put it throughout the conversations, you add maybe 5%, possibly 10% when your team's first spinning up in accessibility stuff and learning it of time. In reality, it'll pay for itself 2-3 times over if you do it that way. So please, if your company cares about accessibility and you actually have someone who does accessibility stuff, let them into the conversations when you're speccing things. Let them into the conversations when you're building things. Do it throughout the process. It will cut your costs massively, and you'll end up with a better product at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And do it often. I mean, it's not a one thing. It's not a we're accessible now, so let's forget about it. Or is it?
No, unfortunately not. Be nice.
It'd be nice, right? It'd be just okay. Let's
I mean,
fix it, and that's it.
but like this, we wouldn't have the problem if it was a case of you can just fix it once and it's done. But generally, it's one of those things that you could fix it once and then never make an update to your application, and it
Right.
would stay accessible.
Yeah.
But that's not how it works.
That's
So
not- yeah.
it's a continuous thing, and one of the other reasons why it's a problem a lot of the times is because the company will have an audit done. By the time they put enough time in to get through that audit, they've released 4 new features that have broken 400 new things. So it's the never-ending cycle where companies pay a lot of money for audits and get absolutely nowhere because they don't change the fundamental way they approach stuff. And that's part of what I'm trying to do this year as my side business, is to actually get companies to put accessibility throughout the whole process.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely share your contact for companies or for devs who just listen to the podcast and want to learn more. But before we end, I want to know where can devs go if they want to get started. If they, if you convinced them and they're like, okay, now I want to know about accessibility. Where do I go?
Yes, so there's something called the ALLY project, A11Y project. That's a fantastic resource with quite a few accessibility things on there. I've got a gigantic 16,500 word article I always point people to on Dev2, so hopefully we can share the link to that in the podcast description or something. But if not, then I will tell you what it is, and you'll find some way of putting that in later, I've no doubt. Then your final option is to go to WCAG, WCAG. So if you search for that, WCAG, those are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They're like the Bible for accessibility. And go and read them. The downside of that is that's where people start getting put off accessibility because they are very wordy, very complicated. They've got all the edge cases covered, so the way things are worded just to make sure there's no confusion,
Right.
It's horrendous. And even then, when you've read all 86 of the guidelines, the success criterion, they conflict in places or they're not quite clear, and like it's a nightmare. So the last thing I'll say is I run a accessibility related Discord server called the Accessibility Monsters. We're literally about to fire up the new cohort as of time of recording next week. And it's a step-by-step. I'll take you through WCAG, make it easy to understand. We'll build some projects with an accessibility first spin on them. And hopefully you'll pick up bits and pieces and you'll get you 60-70% of the way there. So those are the 3 things I can probably recommend off the top of my head. I really wish there was somewhere I could point someone that's like, this is where you start.
Right.
But we don't really have that, unfortunately, still to this day.
Well,
maybe something I'll build.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know what to work on next.
I'm doing the WCAG 101, which is a simplified version of WCAG. So I'll do that first and then see if I've got anything left in the tank to do a complete end-to-end. That's what the Discord server's for, basically, is to fill that gap a little bit.
I mean, having a centralized place where they can at least ask questions, that's already a win. So definitely something that people should check out. All right, my internet is starting to act up, so let's close the episode right now on this note. Please, Graham, share how people can find you online.
Super. Yeah, if you search for Graham the Dev on basically Twitter or TikTok, although I've not got many TikToks yet. LinkedIn, you'll struggle to find me. Don't bother trying to connect there. Dev2, Graham the Dev as well on there. And on Twitch, I'm Graham the DevRel, due to a mistake I made where I've got Graham the Dev, but I've lost the email address. So I'm Graham the DevRel on there. Yeah, you can find me in
Right.
all of those places. Best on Twitter. If you want to get hold of me, I'm more active on Twitter than anywhere else. Love to chat to you about accessibility stuff, whether you just need a helping hand or whether you want me to come and like do a talk to your team or whatever. I'm all about the accessibility, as you can see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Graham, again for coming in as the first guest of the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It was as usual a pleasure talking to you about this. I always learn something different when we talk about accessibility, so I really enjoyed it. I think I do this more for me than for anyone else, but just don't tell them.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. All right, that's it. Thank you again, and thank you everyone listening. Hope you found it interesting, and I catch you on the next one. Until then, see you.
Brilliant. See you, everyone.
Bye. And that was it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to rate the podcast in your favorite podcasting app so that it can reach more developers. In the meantime, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter or X, as people call it, just look for me at DeleteMan123. And that's it. Thank you, and catch you on the next one.